Almost 14 centuries ago, the lands between the Nile and the Oxus were a powder keg of faiths, armies, and exhausted empires. Rome in the east, battered but unbroken. Persia, imperial in ceremony, fractured in practice. And from Arabia, a new force, the Rashidun Caliphate, lean, fast, and hungry. The story you're about to hear is not the opening act. Those thunderclaps have already rolled across Ajnadain, the Yarmouk plain, and the canals of al-Qadisiyyah. This is the next chapter, the sieges and marches that bled into each other until the old political map came apart at the seams. The year is 636 to 637. Syria's high plains smell of dust and sweat. The Roman field army has reeled away from the basalt cliffs above the Yarmouk. In Iraq, Rostam, Persia's iron hand, is gone, swallowed by the chaos at al-Qadisiyyah. The result isn't peace. It's a vacuum. In Medina, the second caliph, Umar ibn al-Khattab, is not a poet of battles. He is a clerk of empire. He inherits a war spread across two frontiers and does something radical for a desert movement still finding its weight. He organizes. He builds registers of pay, settles fighters in garrison towns rather than scattering them back to the tribes, and appoints commanders who can fight and take orders. The army that had been a ring of mobile raids becomes a skeletal system. Garrisons at Kufa and Basra. In Syria, the camps around Damascus, Emesa, and Palestine. But Umar also sets limits. He distrusts the sea and so forbids naval adventures for now. He relies on speed, simplicity, and roads. The road west toward Egypt is a margin of dunes and forts. East toward Persia's heartlands, the roads are royal, straight, and paved with the reputations of men who failed to hold them. In Antioch, Emperor Heraclius paces between faith and strategy. He has stitched his empire together with courage and taxes. He knows Syria can be retaken only if the countryside can be pried out of Arab hands. Too late, he learns that sieges favor the army that owns the fields. Farther east, within the white halls of Ctesiphon, a third generation of Sassanian princes listens to ministers speak of ancient glory and current shortages. Yazdegerd III, a boy king growing into a hunted man, approves plans that always arrive a season after they're needed. His noble houses feud, his treasurers hire, his governors plead. What follows is a double march. One army driving on Persia's old capitals, another threading the canals of the Nile. Between them runs a thin line of orders. Do not chase glory for its own sake. Break the enemy's capacity to gather and strike. With the Roman field army shattered in open country, cities become the emblems that matter. Damascus has fallen, Emesa followed. Behind their walls, bishops bargain and soldiers count arrows. To the south, Jerusalem, Elia, stands out like a lighthouse in a storm. It is not a fortress that can feed itself. It is, however, a symbol that can feed a war. The Muslim armies do not rush the holy city, they surround it. Loosely at first, cutting paths, then supply lines, then hopes. The winter is cold, the young garrison waits for an imperial army that will not come. The patriarch Sophonius and the commanders within the walls know what a sack looks like. They fear an escalade and a storm. Negotiations, as so often in this era, are theology with swords leaned against the wall. The city offers submission, but only to the caliph himself. That is a bet on honor as policy. Umar takes it. Umar rides north with few guards and practical clothes. The stories will be embroidered later, of a camel shared with a servant, of mud on a ruler's robe. But the core is simple. The conquerors send a governor, not an avenger. The city receives him as a sign that future promises might stick. The terms are written, terms that will live a long time in archives and arguments alike. Lives and property are secure, churches stand, a tax is due, soldiers leave. The city opens its gates to a timetable rather than a trumpet. For the Muslim commanders, Jerusalem proves a principle. If they can control the countryside, the cities are patient fruit. Heraclius, it's a wound that shifts the center of gravity north, away from Palestine, toward the fortified edges of Anatolia. The coast remains a Roman coastline, the sea a Roman sea. But inland roads, those the legions once paved, now belong to cavalry who travel light and decide quickly. While flags change on the walls of Syria, another commander stands at the edge of the desert, asking for permission that sounds like a dare. Amr ibn al-Ash has a raider's instincts and a quartermaster's patience. He wants Egypt. In Syria, treaties and tax rolls replace the clamor of siege ladders. But the war is not over. It has only changed direction. South and west, the Nile lies beyond a corridor of forts. East and north, Persia is not defeated. It is merely wounded. Two campaigns begin to move in parallel, each feeding the other with confidence, supplies, and the slow, relentless clarity of a plan. Amr ibn al-Ash is a commander who remembers the price of hesitation. He has served in the negotiations and in the saddle. He argues that Egypt, if taken, will starve any Byzantine hope of a grand return to Syria. The Caliph is cautious and grants permission in terms so conditional that they sound like a test. Go, but do not lose yourself in the dunes. Ask again if the gates resist. Amr takes his small army across Sinai, counting wells, not miles. The first Egyptian towns fall not to surprise, but to calculation. Pelusium resists for weeks. It is a thorn designed to prick any army coming from the east. The defenders are tough. Their arrows strike far. Their walls are blunt and serviceable rather than grand. Amr's men learn the rhythm of Egyptian stone, how it absorbs the shock of ladders and men, how it requires patience more than fury. When Pelusium yields, it does so to a promise that lives will be spared, taxes set, garrison withdrawn. The army moves on, while scribes copy terms onto parchment. Belbais stands next, at the hinge of the delta. Here, the fighting is closer, the alleys narrow. A Roman detachment and local auxiliaries hold out, not for glory, but for time. Amr asks for reinforcements. The Caliph weighs the risks and sends enough to harden the line without fattening it. When Belbais falls, it is not an avalanche. It is an opening of a gate that had been wedged shut. Ahead rises the obstacle that matters. The fortress the Arabs call Babylon, anchored on the east bank of the Nile, where canals web out into the fields. It is a box of dark stone, thick walls, towers positioned to crossfire the approaches, and behind it a river that is a moat with a current. A Roman commander can hold here for months and make his emperor believe that time is a weapon. Amr encamps with patience. He does not have siege engines worthy of the name, nor the leisure to build them under hostile eyes. He has instead cavalry that can ride the edges. The garrison is not only soldiers, there are clerics and city folk, craftsmen and boatmen. Egypt's exarch Cyrus is both administrator and bishop. He seeks lines of communication to Heraclius and to heaven. He bargains hard, then breaks off, then bargains again. Amr's answer is always the same because it must be accept terms and pay the tax, or keep the walls and pay in men. Reinforcements arrive under commanders whose names will fill the next generation's camp songs. Among them is al-Zubair ibn al-Awwam, famed for climbing walls. There are stories of a night escalade at a corner tower, a brief seizure of a section of the wall, an inner gate opened from within while the garrison slept after a day of arrows. Whether every detail is exact hardly matters. What matters is that the balance tilts. Within weeks, the defenders ask to parley in earnest. When Babylon yields, it is to terms that look like those given elsewhere. Property safeguarded, churches preserved, a capitation tax set. The army does not riot, it enters, registers, and moves. A new camp is founded a short march away, on ground suitable for a city that can feed an army without choking on it. The place takes the name Fustat from a general's tent that stands longer than a tent should stand. North along the Nile, a greater prize still glitters with Roman mosaics. Alexandria, whose harbour teeth gnash against every wind, whose walls are high, whose storehouses are full. The city looks seaward and speaks Greek smoothly. It can be relieved by ship, which the Arabs cannot match. Armour moves carefully, both because he must and because he understands that speed without supply is a kind of bravado that kills quietly. The approach to Alexandria is not a single battle, but a series of tests. Outworks are probed and invested. The garrison has enough courage to sortie and enough sense to retreat when exposed. Negotiations flicker and fade. Cyrus returns to the bargaining table, now with knowledge of what has happened in the Delta and a better measure of what may come from Constantinople. The emperor is ill, angry, and tired of paying for failure. He can send ships and men, but not the old aura of certainty. The siege is a hunger march conducted in circles. The Romans hold the sea and can bring grain by convoy. The Arabs hold the fields and can cut caravans on land. Arrow duels cost eyes, escalades cost friends, booms across canals are cut, repaired, and cut again. Finally, the sense becomes shared on both sides. The city can bleed indefinitely or sign once. Terms are reached. The garrison withdraws by sea. Civilians pay the tax, soldiers stack shields and depart. The story of Egypt does not end neatly. A Roman fleet returns years later and retakes Alexandria for a season, and an Arab army returns to retake it again. Coastal towns shift allegiance with the tide. Inland, accounts stay steady. But the spine of the land, its river, its granaries, its scribal class, has accepted a new hierarchies of governors and taxes. For Syria, this means security. For the empire in Constantinople, it is the snapping of a long, proud lifeline. While Amr sits in the shade and listens to petitions, a different drumbeat sounds far to the east. If Egypt starves Rome, then the Tigris and Euphrates can drown Persia's last hopes. The men who had fought at al-Qadisiyyah clean their weapons and talk of a city across a river that has, until now, watched invaders come and go, while its white palace reflects sunlight like a dare. After al-Qadisiyyah, the Muslim army does not rush blindly. It reorganizes at al-Madain's doorstep, because al-Madain is a cluster rather than a single city. Settlements on both banks of the Tigris, with canals and levees, and the remains of palaces that look old, even to those who call them ancient. The Arabs call the main urban heart Ctesiphon, and they do not underestimate it. What they bring to bear is not siegecraft in the classical sense, but a willingness to move when the other side believes no movement is possible. The Persian evacuation is a tragedy played in slow motion. Yazdegerd cannot defend every bend of the river. He relies on subordinates, many of whom still mourn Rostam or quietly resent the boy they are sworn to protect. Jalinus commands a rearguard with the professionalism of a man who has seen too many campaigns and survived them. His job is to keep the Arabs west of the Tigris long enough for treasure and dignitaries to evacuate east. The river is flood and obstacle, moat and trap. Watchposts see every movement. The Muslims feint north and south, probing for a crossing that is not suicidal. They find what every riverine army seeks, a night shallow that is shallow enough, a wind that muffles, a point where the current slackens for a few hours before dawn. It is an ugly crossing. Men lash shields together into rafts. Horses swim with wide eyes. Archers on the far bank send arrows at sounds instead of shapes. Enough men cross to form a knot that cannot be cut without higher casualties than the rear guard can afford. When dawn reveals the truth, the rear guard withdraws in good order, favoring the safety of the living over the sanctity of a line on the map. Ctesiphon's white palace does not fall in a last stand. It is emptied with care and regret, carpets pulled, treasures loaded, doors barred. The conquerors enter a hall made to astonish and are astonished. They take what armies have always taken, then they post guards and appoint an officer whose job is to become boring as quickly as possible. The old capital is too grand to live and too useful to abandon. The army moves on because it has to, not because it is restless. The Persians do not give up the field, they choose it. North of the fallen capital, at Jalula, they prepare the kind of position that can impose a price on every step. The ground favors defense, open enough for archers, ringed with trenches and pits that can break a charge and channel momentum into slaughter. Miran, or one of the great family's captains who take his place in the sources, holds the line with archers in depth and cavalry held back to exploit disorder. Their plan is old and wise. Let the attackers bleed, then counterattack where the blood pools. Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, still in overall command, though pain keeps him from the front, sends a forward army under veterans who do not scare easily. Kaka ibn Amma is there, and men who learned humility at the bridge and confidence at al-Qadisiyyah. They begin with caution, because the trenches make arrogance look like suicide. Skirmishers feel for the edges of the traps, with their feet and their lives. The first rushes fail. The air is feathered with arrows. The horses balk where the ground gives way under a thin crust of dust. The Muslims adapt in the way of armies that cannot afford to be clever for cleverness' sake. They stop trying to break the center with weight. Instead, they mark the map with small, ugly goals. Fill this ditch under fire. Clear that lane with shields locked where earlier men fell. Feint on the right until the archers turn their heads, then slide a body of foot through the thinnest part of the earthworks on the left. None of this is glorious. All of it is cumulative. The Persians counter as soon as they see a serious breach. Heavy cavalry, mailed and disciplined, rides where a repulse is needed. For a time, the old balance reasserts itself. Armored men on trained horses stand for a tradition that has held these plains since before the invaders' grandfathers were born. Then the arrows tire, the horses sweat, and a crack opened in the morning becomes a gap by afternoon. Kaka throws in a reserve he had kept hidden. Its job is not to win. Its job is to rush a makeshift barricade of sacks and earth and turn it into a gate by pushing through. When that gate opens, even a little, he pours men through not as a wedge, but as a flood. The defense that relies on a line begins to behave like a crowd. Miran's captains try to fix it with a charge. They hit hard, and for a moment, the attackers bend. Then another breach becomes a path, and the countercharge has no space to wheel and strike again. Jalula becomes less a battle than a breakup. There is an attempt to withdraw deliberately, to leave the trenches in order and form again a few hundred paces back. It fails because the men filling those trenches from the wrong side do not stop to breathe. A rearguard forms and is cut down. Archers throw away bows and run with daggers. Some units escape toward the mountains. The rest break where the pits are deepest and cannot be crossed quickly. When the field is silent again, the Muslims do not pursue far. They know that the mountains will hold what men do not. They collect prisoners and account books. They remark the map with governors and stipends. They send detachments north, along the Tigris, to take the small cities that feed big armies. Tikrit yields, Mosul watches, and decides to accept terms rather than stones. In each place, the process is the same: a short show of force, a long explanation of taxes, and an invitation to get back to work. For Yazdegerd, the loss is more than a battle, it is a corridor. The route from his old capital into Media and beyond is no longer guarded by habit. He retreats into the mountains and then beyond them, looking for noble houses that will not merely salute, but also supply. From there, he will try to raise new armies, and he will find new counselors who speak of winter and terrain as allies. The next stand will not be in the river valleys, but on the slopes, where horsemen tire and infantry sweat cold. The place will have a name that sounds like stone: Nihavand. In the meantime, the Caliphate learns what it means to hold as well as to take. The registers grow thicker. Stipends must be paid on time, or the men who collect the taxes will be met by men who once followed them in battle and now grumble in markets. New garrison towns become points on trade routes. Judges arrive whose disputes are about water rights as often as doctrine. The veterans who remember the fires at al-Qadisiyyah teach stiff new recruits how to stand in a line long enough to repel raiders, and how to leave the line long enough to butcher goats without starting a blood feud. To the west, Egypt's calm is deceptive. An admiral in Constantinople believes that the loss can be undone by ships and oath-taking. He will be right for a season and wrong for a year. The army in Fustat and the farmers on the riverbanks will feed each other until the next fleet arrives, and then they will do what they have learned to do in Syria: absorb the shock and reply when it is convenient. To the east, the old Persian road system sends its last useful gifts to its enemies: information and speed. A courier system that once carried royal orders now carries warnings of ambushes and news of villages willing to change governors for the price of a fair assessment. The Caliph in Medina receives letters from two horizons that both say the same thing in different words. The war is not finished, but it is now a story that can be told in chapters rather than omens. The fall of capitals is neither the end of an enemy nor the beginning of an empire. It is a turn in a road that keeps going. Ahead lies mountain country that makes cavalry uncertain and promises treachery to anyone who promises too much. Ahead lies Nihavand, where the last great Sassanian army will gather behind a plan that looks clever enough to work. And beyond even that, there are frontiers that face seas the Caliph fears, and deserts that run to other civilizations with other names. The march does not stop. It pauses, eats, argues, and starts again. With Syria held and Egypt changing its ledgers, the question in the east refuses to vanish. Capitals have fallen, but kings still write orders. The valleys of the Tigris and Euphrates have yielded their keys. The mountains have not. A last great Sassanian army gathers where roads pinch into passes, and where a general can force an enemy to pay for every step. Its name is Nihavand. The Persian court has become a tent that will not stay pitched. Yazdegerd moves from city to city, searching for loyalty that is not merely spoken. The nobles argue about blame and about the meaning of patience. Some write to the emperor in Constantinople. Some whisper that the Turks to the northeast might be persuaded to join. The one thing on which they agree is that there must be, at least once more, a battle on terms they understand. Nihavand is chosen because it is made for defense. The ground rises and falls in folds that can hide cavalry and expose infantry. Trench lines can be cut to funnel attackers. The great families send what they can: armored horsemen, archers, foot levies, hardened by years of watching borders. An experienced commander, Firuzan to some, Farrukhzad to others in different sources, takes overall charge. His plan is to make the invaders fight into pits and spikes, suck them forward, then break them cleanly with a reserve charge and pursuit. It is an old plan, but old plans are old because they work. From Kufa, Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas cannot ride because pain keeps him in a fortress chair. He commands by letter and by men he trusts. To the field he sends veterans, among them Nu'man ibn Muqarrin, whose calm steadied hard days in Iraq, and Kaka ibn Amr, whose speed has undone more than one careful enemy line. The army that marches toward Nihavand is not as large as the one that stood at al-Qadisiyyah, but it is tougher. It has learned to hate trenches. Skirmishes mark the approach. Scouts mark where the earth gives way under dust. Engineers, such as they are, carry spades instead of ladders. The Persians hold behind their fieldworks and let the archers do what archers do. The first probes are punished. Dead men and wounded horses show the price of impatience. Nu'man walks the lines at dusk, speaking one thing again and again: hold until the moment is the moment. The moment must be made. The Persian line, strong behind pits and stakes, will not break unless it leaves its shelter. That, Nu'man decides, is the hinge. He orders a staged withdrawal at midday 2 days later, a visible sag in the Muslim front, dust raised by rearward movement, a shout of alarm meant to be overheard. Standards tilt. Drums beat a retreat that is not a retreat. The trick works because it is done without panic. Persian lookouts see the line bend and send word. Some captains argue to stay behind the trenches. Others, more aggressive and more confident, insist that the invaders are finally breaking. Firuzan chooses to seize what looks like victory. Horns sound. Gates in the fieldworks are thrown open. Cavalry pours through, followed by blocks of infantry, eager for a clean fight on open ground. Nu'man had left lanes between his units during the feigned retreat, channels into which an enemy can surge and then be hit on both edges. When the Persians are far enough away from their trenches that turning back would be a scramble, the drums change. The sag straightens. Reserve cavalry, wheeling on the flanks, bite at the Persian edges. Arrows and javelins sting in close. The center is a grind. Nu'man, in mail that does not gleam, pushes forward where standards threaten to dip. He is struck in the face by a shaft that does not kill at once. He calls to hide him beneath a cloak, so the men will not see him fall. The line hears only the order to press. The Persians, finding no route, now find a wall that pushes back. On the right, Kaka times his charge to the noise in the center. He does not drive straight. He angles for the space between Persian cavalry and their supporting infantry. It is a seam rather than a gap, but he knows what to do with seams. The first wave hits and bounces. The second wave clears the bounce with weight men have learned in the last 2 years. The third wave, held back for this, drives deep enough that the Persian horse must choose between turning to face him or being cut from their foot. They turn. The foot are left without their shield of hooves. The dust hides faces and confuses friend and foe. Commands are carried by trumpets and by habit. On the left, Muslim infantry that had backed away hours earlier now come on with steady steps. They carry hooked poles to drag aside bundles and stakes and broad shields to catch arrows. When Persian infantry, brave and eager, charge to reclaim initiative, they find a line that yields by a pace and then returns that pace with interest. The Persian rearguard hears the change before it sees it. The shouting shifts from exultant to careful. The first men who turn to run back for the safety of the trenches see them, opened gates, familiar parapets, and then see that they are too far, and that the route back is through an enemy that is no longer pretending to flee. Firuzan commits his last reserve to cover a pullback. It is too late to restore the shape of the battle. Numan dies at last, his brother taking his banner and his orders. The men hear of his death only when the field is decided. The Persian army breaks in sections. One section makes it back over the fieldworks and escapes toward Hamadan. They are pursued, but not recklessly. Another section fights in knots, dying where they stand. A third rides for the east. Narrator: after Nihavand, the shape of Persian defense collapses in lines rather than in a single piece. Hamadan yields to terms that look much like those the Arabs have offered before: life and law, in exchange for tax and quiet. Isfahan fights and is taken, its great houses bargaining separately and then together. At Ray, the same pattern repeats, with variations born of old feuds between local families. The White Palace, taken months earlier, becomes a memory rather than a rallying point. Yazdegerd moves again to the edge of Khorasan, and partners who were once courted become obstacles on roads he does not control. The conquerors are careful to leave garrisons where the roads fork and to register men who know those roads. Qadisiyyah's quick wreckage is not repeated. Instead, there is the slow work of post houses and markets. Governors are named. Judges are appointed. Agreements are copied and sealed. The soldiers complain that they have become clerks. The clerks reply that an army that does not keep accounts becomes a raid, and raids end. More columns move out, their orders firm but not grand. One rides south and east into Fars, where Istakhar guards memories and temples. Resistance is serious there. The old heartland of the empire does not bow easily. It is fought village by village until the city's last gates must open. Another column goes toward Kerman and then Sistan, where the canals are strange and the people less eager to listen. Winter and sand argue for the defenders. Habit and pay argue for the attackers. In the end, arguments turn to written terms the same as elsewhere. In the north, the frontier is not a line, but a set of bargains. A force moves into Azerbaijan, taking Ardabil after brief resistance and then placing a garrison. From there, riders go to Mariga and Tabriz, finding allies in some towns who prefer a predictable tax to the unpredictability of warlords. Qazvin is fortified to watch the passes into Daylam, and the mountain people who owe little to any empire. Letters go to chiefs offering aman, protection, in return for tribute. Some accept, others wait, and will have to be convinced later. Nihavand is called the victory of victories, not because it ends everything, but because it makes the ending of one era inevitable. The Sassanian crown survives on the heads of generals who can win winter battles in the east. The imperial tax rolls survive in ledgers now written by other hands. The men who stood at Nihavand will march again, but their enemies will not as an army. They will appear instead as bands and brigands, and as letters sealed in the wax of old titles. The war is not done. It has simply changed into something that will not make poems. In the west, the Nile fattens fields under a new administration. In the north, beyond Syria, the mountains of Armenia and the walls of the Caucasus take the measure of a new power. Between those heights and the great inland sea are nobles who have balanced for centuries between Shah and Basilius. They will try to balance again. An Arab column crosses the Euphrates at a place where the ford is known to merchants and to raiders. It moves through the old Armenian satrapies, not with the speed of a raid, but with the deliberation of an army that intends to return in spring. Towns such as Dvin and Nakhchivan hear the same choices that were offered in Mesopotamia: pledge, pay, and keep your law, or resist and see your earthworks become ladders. Some resist, some calculate. An Armenian prince, seeking to keep both his title and his people, offers hostages and a promise of tribute in return for recognition of his authority. The Arab commander writes the terms where they can be found later and moves on. The chessboard of the north is not to be finished in a season. At the gates of the Caucasus, where a fortress called Darband clamps the shore to mountains, envoys talk. Behind those gates live people whose alliances change with pasture. Beyond them ride the Khazars, who will test any wall that faces them. The Arabs are not ready to own the gates. They are ready to make sure that anyone who comes through them does not do so unannounced. Garrisons are placed in cities that feed the passes. Patrols ride to the foothills and back. The message is simple: we are here, and we will be here again. Across the sea, Constantinople counts ships. The emperor is younger now and impatient. In the calculations of his advisors, Egypt is a wound that can still be cauterized. A fleet is assembled from islands and from the capital's own docks, commanded by men who grew up with oars in their hands. Alexandria is targeted not because it is easiest, but because it is both door and symbol. The fleet arrives like weather. The walls that have faced the land are ready. The walls that face the water are confident. For a season, the city returns to Roman hands. A new governor reads old laws and promises that the order which once held will hold again. Some Greek-speaking citizens are relieved. Some are cautious. The garrison in Fustat receives the news and listens to the market wives say that a city can be retaken twice, but a river cannot be moved. Ayama, recalled from administrative work to emergency command, gathers men who have seen such turns before. He does not try to meet the fleet at sea. He cannot. He gathers instead along the canals and desert tracks that run between the river and the city. Small forts that had been left as way stations become the teeth of a trap. Water is diverted where it can be. Barges are dragged. The landward approaches are closed one by one. The counter-siege is slow and ugly. Skirmishes along dikes replace the clean clash of lines. When the Romans sortie, they are met on the narrow ground the Arab commanders prefer. When they withdraw, they do so under the arrows of men who now know what ranges their bows can reach. In time, the fleet cannot feed the city and keep itself fed. The governor writes for terms. The terms are the same as before, with one addition the Egyptians will not forget. The city will not be counted as a fortress again. Its sea gates are barred and left to corrupt in salt. Alexandria changes hands again, and this time it stays changed. Some who had come back with the fleet sail away. Others stay and sign the tax rolls. Craftsmen return to their quarters. Grain barges move as before. Fustat, no longer a camp but a city, grows in the way cities grow when roads point at them. The pivot into Armenia does not become a conquest right away. It becomes a set of promises, lots of them, and the promise of punishment when a promise is broken. The second taking of Alexandria does not make the sea safe for Arab ships. It makes the land around the sea safe for Arab clerks. In between, raids from Anatolia test the Syrian frontier and are answered in kind. Quick marches to the Orontes, quick burnings of supply depots, withdrawals before the season turns. In the east, the name on everyone's lips is still Yazdegerd. He is no longer a king in palaces. He is a king on the road. He sends messengers to the east and to the north, asking for troops the way a man asks for water, now, not later. Some come for pay, some for old loyalty, some because an Arab governor told them not to. A line is drawn on maps around a city whose name tastes like river water. Nihavand has been lost, so the next stand must be farther away, in mountain country where tight valleys punish those who have learned to love open plains. The Caliph, for his part, learns that victory creates bills. Soldiers expect stipends. Widows expect stipends. Tribes expect to be told the plan before they are told where to march. He writes orders that make sense to accountants and anger cousins. He sends inspectors who are careful with their words. He reminds commanders that a winter of carelessness can undo a summer of skill. Narrator: in Syria, the markets fill with new goods and rumors. In Egypt, the first families learn the names of men who sign Arabic script and mean it. In Iraq, judges settle ditch disputes larger than some battles. In Armenia, princes teach their sons to bow to two capitals and to remember which one is nearer. The war narrows into lines of administration and flares into battles where terrain insists. Ahead, there is a mountain nest the Persians believe cannot be cracked, and a new pattern of raids that will turn into campaigns along an African coast that has not been part of any Arab plan yet. The hill at Nihavand has gone quiet, but the sound it made keeps rolling through valleys and courts. A plan collapses, not with a single shout, but with letters that do not bring the answers a king wants. The road east crowds with wagons that carry ledgers and children. A crown travels wrapped in cloth, not worn. The generals divide maps the way merchants divide seasons. One column turns south into Fars, another east toward Kerman and Esistan, a third north into Azerbaijan, and a fourth climbs by stages toward Khorasan. Orders are simple: keep moving, don't spend men where paper will do, and leave someone who can count behind you. In Fars, Istakhr stiffens itself with memory. Here, the city says, is where kings learned to be kings. Its gates close. Its warriors swear that they will still be standing when the strangers go home. The strangers do not go home. Siege is patient work. The wells are watched, the orchards are tallied, the lanes inside the walls are guessed at by the shadows they throw at dawn. When the gate finally opens, the terms are recited like a prayer the victors have learned by heart. Your quarter is yours. Your worship is yours. Your tax is ours. In Kerman, the desert speaks in a voice that doesn't need soldiers. Columns thin because water is a commander of its own. Villages bargain with skins and promises. When the men from Basra arrive at last, they arrive in smaller pieces, but they arrive, and they do what garrisons do: post lists, count storage jars, write down names no clerk has written before. In Sistan, the canals confuse newcomers. The people do not. They have seen governors come and go. They ask the only question they ever ask: how much? The answer is written with a rate and a date. The old tax farmers, suddenly polite, ask for pens. North and west of the Caspian, the nobles of Azerbaijan watch the wind. They have pledged to Ctesiphon and to Constantinople in their turn. Now they listen to horse bells from the south. Ardabil bargains fiercely and then yields to a treaty that looks like the others. Maraga, Kazvan, and the towns between keep their own men in their own halls and send coin down the roads. Beyond them lie mountains where tribes do not like roads at all. Envoys go as far as they can, come back with gifts and half-promises, and mark in their ledgers that this part of the empire prefers winter to store visitors. The column for Khorasan moves slowest, not for lack of will, but because the country there is large in a way the men from Kufa have not yet learned. Ray had already tasted defeat. Now it supplies. Kumis makes the same calculation. Nishapur listens to its decans, landlords who understand that collecting tax for a new master is better than explaining to tenants why they burned the fields for an old one. Herat opens its gates after riding out one storm. Merv does not open at all. It will be argued with in its season. And the king? Yazdegerd rides ahead of his own name. He asks for troops from men who no longer have any to spare. He asks for money from treasuries that are on those wagons behind him. He asks for time from a calendar that does not forgive. He writes to the north and to the east, to the Turks and to the lords, who have always expected to be paid in iron and in women. Some come. Some wait to see who will own the roads when the snows are gone. The army that followed Numan to Nihavand is now 2 winters older. Its officers can read the ground by the way birds fly and the way dust lies in midday heat. They have learned that a city taken with terms gives better sleep than a city taken with fire, and that a steward who keeps his desk keeps the peace better than 3 fresh captains. The caliph's letters arrive with corrections in the margin. Pay the men on time. Appoint judges who understand the old law as well as the new. Do not put a clever thief in charge of the treasury because he is clever. In Kufa and Basra, what were once camps have become towns with neighbors who complain about donkeys. The payroll books, the Duan, are copied and recopied. Veterans are ranked not only by courage, but by when they enlisted, and the men who came first hear their names before the men who came later. Some grumble that the town across the river got a better rate. The clerks reply that rates are not battles, they are fences, and fences keep peace. In the west, the Nile flows as if it never heard of wars, and yet the banks are different. An Arab governor in Fustat answers letters with a speed that astonishes old families in Alexandria, who had learned to wait for good seals and the right nephew. In the east, the Oxus is a rumor. What is near is enough. A last stand in Fars, a last winter in Merv, a last letter to friends who have already learned to sign in Arabic. The march to Khorasan resumes when grass rises. Nishapur is fed and quiet. Tus watches and gives hostages. Sarax holds a day and a night and then counts the dead and chooses counting over dying. Herat, this time, does not pretend to a second resistance. It has seen what second resistances cost. At last, the walls of Merv throw long shadows. The garrison commander at Merv is a practical man. He has weighed kings before. He invites Yazdegerd to a feast and counts knives. The Persian king trusts because there is nothing else to trust. On the day chosen, the garrison does not switch sides openly. It simply makes itself smaller. Men who are supposed to be at the south gate are at the west. Men who were at the granary are at the bath. A fight begins somewhere and ends everywhere. Traditions disagree about the final minutes. Some say Yazdegerd is cut down in a mill, a king quartered among sacks of grain. Some say a noble with old grievances orders a sword stroke in a courtyard and walks away without looking back. Some say he gets as far as the river and is pulled down into water that does not know him. All agree on two things. There is no third empire to go to, and there is no letter after this one. Khorasan does not bow in a day. Its towns do not answer to a single bell. But the weight has shifted. The last crown of Sassan sits on a shelf in a garrison house for a while, and then is sent to a capital that is not Ctesiphon. The men make copies of the treaty they have written 100 times. They empty the last imperial treasury with the care of men who will have to show the numbers to someone who counts for a living. Back west, the calendar changes in a way no soldier planned for. The caliph who signed pay orders and corrected tax rates is stabbed at prayer. Medinan's streets fill with voices that know 100 ways to choose a successor and want to use all of them at once. They do not. A council chooses a new man who is less feared by soldiers and more trusted by cousins. The letters to the frontiers keep coming, now with a new hand, and the governors read them and keep their heads down. The map, when spread, shows more ink than it used to. But maps are liars if you think they show what people feel. The men at Ray still argue about irrigation. The men in Istakhur still tell their sons stories about kings. The men in Basra want a market roof that won't leak. The army wants forage on time. The judges want cases that don't involve cousins on both sides. The empire wants what empires want: quiet. When Alexandria was taken the second time, the sea did not stop being the sea. It is still a road for men who like to argue with wind. In Carthage, officials count hulls and realize they cannot be everywhere at once. They decide to be somewhere important. They choose to be where the rivers feed ships and where the grain grows easily. Cyrenaica sits in between. The governor in Fustat asks for horses and is given patience instead. He marches west along the coast, where cities sit like beads on a string. Barca, Eusperides, places whose old Greek names stick to their new tax records like perfume to a cloak. At each, he says the same thing his colleagues say everywhere. Your market stays, your priests keep their books, your tariff is now ours. Most towns choose to write rather than fight. A few towns test the walls they have paid to keep up and learn that walls, without friends behind them, are just expensive hills. Tripoli is stubborn. It has sea on one side, wall on two, and desert on the last. It believes that 3 out of 4 is enough. The siege is not heroic. It is a dull argument about wells and gates. The defenders try a breakout on a night when the moon favors them. It does not. When the gates open, the garrison marches out with dignity. The governor records their names and pays the scribes to spell them correctly. A small garrison stays in the city. The main army marches back east without pretending it can eat sand all the way to Carthage. It will return when the road is ready. On the northern frontier, the passes are where they always were, and men who once answered to Heraclius now answer to men who have replaced him. The commanders in Emesa and Damascus learn the rhythm of the new war. Summer raids into Cilicia and Cappadocia. Winter in the towns where their children are learning to call the alleys home. They do not talk about conquest. They talk about bridges and granaries and where an ambush would be if they were the other side. The other side thinks the same, and so the border becomes a season. The Sawaif, summer campaigns, long rides with short fights, and a ledger that balances. Iron Bridge, the crossing north of Antioch, changes hands more than once, not with grand battles, but with timing. A Roman column comes down too far and is caught. An Arab column turns back too slow and loses its baggage. Germanicia, north and east, learns to keep extra sacks of grain for whichever side rides through Hungary. Melitene becomes a rumor, sometimes taken, sometimes not. Each year, camp songs pick up new names and lose old ones. In Armenia, the princes sharpen two kinds of knives, one for boars and one for oaths. They keep both close. An Arab commander sits at Divin and hears the complaints of men who do not mind paying as long as their neighbors pay more. He assigns tribute, takes hostages when the wind blows wrong, and writes, in clear script, what will happen to men who forget who they promised last. In the high valleys, the tribes ignore all of it until snow melts and horse bells ring again. The death of one caliph and the rise of another shows up in the most ordinary places. In Kufa, the Friday preacher uses a different name. In Basra, the market inspector receives a letter with a new seal and the same instructions. In Khuzestan, a deacon who had been thinking about taking his men to the marshes decides instead to invite the garrison commander to a wedding. In Merv, the last men who said, "We are the king's men," now say, "We are the governor's men," and the tax rate does not change. The new caliph likes to see family in office. Some appointments pass easily, others produce whispers. A governor in Kufa is replaced more than once. In Basra, a commander learns that suddenly he must write more letters than he fights battles. The veterans watch and say nothing. They have learned that saying nothing is a skill. Along the Euphrates, the canal men are heroes. They cut new channels and revive old Roman ones, bringing water to places where barley can grow for a garrison that will be here for years and needs bread, not promises. A canal from the Nile to the Red Sea is cleared of silt, the old ditch made new, and barges float with grain that does not have to risk the sea. Every stroke of a shovel is a campaign. In the east, governors test the Oxus with their toes and pull them back. Across it lie people who will not sign the same treaties, who pride themselves on the ways they can break circles. The commanders keep their curiosity and their caution. They send envoys with gifts and come back with words. This will need another season and other men. From Fars to Tripoli, from Divin to the Iron Bridge, men tell different stories about the same orders. The words that begin those orders are the same. In the name, the endings are always the same, and keep accounts. The soldiers begin to believe that this is how victory is kept, by knowing who owes what and when they owe it, and by hitting hard only where it matters. Yazdegerd's name drifts into stories told to children who did not see him. The White Palace is something fathers describe with their hands, the way you show the size of a fish. A handful of captains in the Far East still use his titles when they send letters to hill fortresses, but their messengers no longer get salutes. They get asked whether the men behind them can pay. In time, even those captains learn to sign differently. At the sea, the ships still go. Carthage fills itself with refugees who do not like taxes they cannot influence. Sicily watches coasts and prays for dull winters. The exarchs do tall arithmetic and send it to a capital that is very sure of its walls. The new rulers of Egypt are less sure of ships. They do not pretend otherwise. They stack the land on their side of the scales and make sure it will be heavier next year. In Syria, the tribes learn new schedules. Men who roamed for rumor now roam for payroll. A boy born the year of Yarmouk is now tall enough to lift a spear and old enough to be bored by stories of the day that made his city part of a different world. He will tell other stories, how the snow looks on the Amanus, how the Cilician gate smells in summer, how his cousin married a girl from Emesa, whose father runs a spice stall. The story we began with 3 empires has fewer names now, but no less movement. 2 crowns fell. The one that stands must learn not to fall in the ways that crowns fall: pride, neglect, waste. The letters from the capital remind men who have become used to winning that men who win still answer for what they spend. The frontier reminds those same men that the next valley holds someone who would be happy to teach them humility. Ahead there is a coast that curves farther west than any of these soldiers have ridden, and a set of mountains in the north whose passes could swallow armies if the snows come at the wrong time. There is also a city of 7 hills whose name is said with half a smile and half a dare. The maps on the tables are not finished. The ink is not dry. Frontiers are not fences. They are habits. When habits change, borders move without anyone noticing for a year, and then all at once, everyone notices. The armies that learn to read deserts now have to read coasts and rivers with the same care. The men who sign terms now have to live with them. Swords helped. Pens will decide whether any of it lasts. The governor in Fustat stands on a flat roof and watches the river do the job of a road. Boats bump like camels, carrying letters as precious as grain. His desk is a field of wax and reed. Reports from the west arrive with the grit of the coast sticking to their folds. The provinces beyond the Sirte are a string of towns that remember every flag they have flown. Barca nods first, because it understands that caravans like quiet. The governor does not bring a sermon to Barca, he brings a survey. Canals, granaries, the places where the old garrison kept its mules, he writes them down. And the men whose fathers paid tax to emperors pay it now to a clerk with a different seal. The road along the sea is a teacher. Winter tells columns when to stay near wells. Summer tells sailors when to hold the coast tight and pray. Tripoli had learned to use both teachers. Its walls face sand and spray, and its captains know how to send a boat out at dusk and have it return with rumors at dawn. The first siege ends in talk, not ladders. The tariff is recalculated. A small gate inside the main gate is reserved for the governor's men. A sign goes up in the market with rates in 2 scripts. Nothing dramatic, everything binding. West of Tripoli, the land forgets to be a line. Dunes fold into thorn, thorn into olive, olive into low hills holding water where maps forgot to draw it. Tribes from the interior come not because they love empires, but because the coast has always been where salt and iron met. The governor sends 3 kinds of men to they who are called by many names: gift-bearers, list-makers, and storytellers. The gift-bearers bring cloth and knives and a rumor. The men from Carthage are busy with their own arguments. The list-makers kneel by a well and count households, tent by tent, and ask who owes who. The storytellers sit by fires and tell how treaties can endure when they are written on skin and then kept in the mouths of men who must meet every spring. It works more often than it fails. Not always. South of the coast road, a cluster of palm groves burns one night because a mule was taken and a cousin would not return it. The governor rides out, not in armor, but with scale weights. He finds both sides, heavier where the mule sleeps. He leaves 2 scribes and 1 veteran with a quiet voice. 3 months later, the same palms shade a market where leather changes hands for salt cakes stamped with the new ruler's stamp. Peace is the price of boredom. News arrives by sea with a sound like plates. In Carthage, the exarch measures coastlines with ships the way desert chiefs measure valleys with hooves. A squadron slides east, tests harbors, lights a stack of reeds near a depot to see who comes to put it out. Alexandria's new wardens learn that water carries enemies faster than even the best road. They answer with watchtowers, horn codes, and a promise to coastal villages. Send a boy to the tower at sundown with word of sales, and your tax is lighter by 1/10. It is amazing what boys can see. The second westward march is longer and more certain. The towns remember that the governor kept his word last year. He did not pull down churches. He did not let his men take harvest before it was cut. He did, however, change the calendar on which taxes were due. It now matches the river and the sea, not the saints' days. Surly at first, the merchants learn to like predictability more than sentiment. Accounts reconcile, tempers follow. In the interior, a confederation sends its spokesman. He wears nothing like a court robe and speaks like a man who knows every well by name. "We will not fight for your enemies," he says, "and we will not fight for you. We will fight for ourselves and for the right to camp where our grandfathers camped." The governor nods. "Then do not fight my roads," he answers. "Your pastures are yours. The roads are mine. If a merchant is cut on your land, you will pay his blood price as if he were your brother." The spokesman considers. "We are many. Our cousins are unreliable," he says. "Write the price where we can show it to them when they are angry." The clerk writes a number as carefully as if it were a prayer. Sufetula sits inland, like a thought someone has not yet said aloud. It is richer than a frontier town should be, and its walls are too clean. The exarch's nephews count their days there in wine and worry. When the new army comes up out of the olives, the nephews shut the gates and send a fast horse. "Carthage is 3 days away by good sea," a captain says to the governor. "By the time their ships come, we will be gone, or we will be under their arrows." The governor rubs his beard and orders trenches, not to storm, but to hug. He asks for the town's accounts, knowing the request will offend. It does. Good. Offended men write sooner than content ones. 3 weeks later, after 2 night sorties and 3 small fires, the town's elders come out with ledgers. "Take their silver," the governor says quietly, "and their word. Leave the nephews 1 house and a fast mule. A trapped animal breaks fences. A frightened animal remembers which way it ran." The sea never stops testing. A late raid from the west slips past a sleepy watch on a fog night and sets a warehouse in Alexandria alight. The fire eats cloth, not grain. The governor doubles the fog patrols and pays the watchman in advance for the winter months. "You cannot be brave on half pay," he says to a captain who thinks loyalty grows by itself. By the end of the second campaign season, the coast from Barca to Tripoli pays the same tax to the same men, uses the same weights in market stalls, and sends its disputes to judges who have learned to keep a balance and a silence. Beyond that, promises and gossip draw the lines. Carthage hears more and more about treaties written on leather and on habit. It hates both equally. East of Merv, the Oxus moves with the certainty of a ruler and the moods of a horse. On one day, it is the only frontier that matters. On the next, a bridge laughs at it. The men who hunted a king to the sands now stand on its banks and pretend not to dream of what is beyond. Markets that glitter with coins that do not melt in hand, cities that bury their canals like treasure, princes who own more cousins than spears. The governor of Khorasan knows that pretending not to want something is as important as wanting it. He sends ambassadors, not scouts, and they carry better gifts than their fathers ever saw. Silk taken from one coast, sent to be admired on another. A set of scales that finds false silver without insult. A quiver of arrows so straight that a prince can admire them without thinking of what they are for. Bukhara listens by leaning back against cushions. Its princes have fed armies before. They ask the right question first. How many men do you bring, and how long can you feed them? The ambassador smiles. Fewer than your carpets can count, he says, and long enough to be remembered. But we would rather send a man with a pen than a field of men with blades. Tell us the price of your peace. The price is named. It includes keys to a gate that will not be used and the promise of a mosque that will begin as a prayer room in the bazaar. The governor signs, "Do not garrison yourselves in a place you cannot water," he warns his own captains. "We are not here to fall in love with walls. We are here to make sure roads pay us to keep them open." Samarkand writes with a thin brush and laughs quietly. It will not commit itself to any man who cannot reach it twice in a year. When the first riders from the south come within a day's march, the princes send fruit and singers and a draft of tribute whose coins shine with faces no one in Kufa has ever seen. When the riders turn back for winter, the same princes send twice as much silver to a northern lord who believes that paying him is the same as respecting him. "We will take from both until one stops asking," they say, and they are not wrong. A fort is raised at Tirmidh not as a fist, but as a ledger. Its walls are thick enough to keep out thieves and thin enough to remind the garrison that they are guests. The quartermaster is the most dangerous man in the fort. He writes what came in and what went out, and who signed for both. Traders from the other bank learn the names of the sentries who will be fair for a small sake and unforgiving for a large one. In a year, the fort is on every caravan master's route because it is easier to pay one clerk than 20 persuadable band chiefs. Not everyone admires the ledger. In the foothills, a clan that calls itself by an old name decides that taxes are like rain, useful to fields, but no respecter of tents. They raid a convoy that thought the fort's shadow was longer than it was. The governor does not send a punitive column right away. He sends blankets to the nearest rivals of the raiders and bids them winter comfortably. In spring, the rivals push their cousins out of preference, not out of piety. The convoy's merchant, seeing his bales of cloth sold back to him at a fair price by the men who took them, shakes his head and pays the tax again. "You have made the hills part of the market," he tells the governor. "That is either genius or sin." The governor shrugs. "It is cheaper," he says. "Beyond the Oxus, the land never forgets its old loves. A ruler who likes to be called king uses the word friend like a spear. He invites the fort's captain to a hunt and tells a joke about lions that isn't funny. The captain laughs anyway, because it is better to laugh than to be quoted. On the way back, the captain notes where the narrow defiles are and where a small dam would drown a field. He writes it down that night as a list of repairs the local canal needs. He is careful to use the word repair, not the word weapon. Back to the west, where the Oxus isn't, the life of an empire is ink. Kufa argues about who should be paid first, the men who fought first or the men who marched farther. Basra argues about the size of date pits in the market and whether they should be taxed separately from the dates. Fustat argues about which quarter should pay for the new bridge. Emesa argues about whether the Friday sermon should name the caliph before it names the judge, and the judge says that this is a very interesting question that will be settled after collection day. At the center, a palace that is not a palace passes envelopes that are not sealed with jewels. The caliph, who followed the one who fell by a blade, writes in a hand that is plain and lines that are straight. He appoints kinsmen in places where a son of no one would have been better, and appoints sons of no one where a cousin expects a sinecure. Both choices create complaints. He lets the letters pile and signs them slowly. He changes one coin, then another. He does not change the calendar. He learns too late that the easiest way to be hated is to ask the men who have learned to count differently. On the frontier, few care. Pay on time matters. Rations on time matters. A judge who visits once a year and writes down disputes with a clear hand matters. Big questions, whose name leads the prayer, who sits where in Medina, become dust when a wall needs lime. A captain tells his men, "We will be judged by the villages we leave behind us. If they are quiet, our wars were worth the trouble." The men nod and put their pay in belts sewn by wives who do not want to go back to the tents their mothers knew. The first prayer houses in Bukhara and Tirmidh are small and smell of cinnamon because they were shops before they were mosques. They are not statements, they are shelters for sound. Traders kneel next to men who used to collect tax for kings who no longer write letters. A boy, the son of a dihkan, repeats a short chapter and stumbles because the words run differently than the ones in his father's law code. The imam corrects him gently. "Keep both," he says. "You will need both." The northern lords test the river. One spring, a band of horsemen, with hats like bowls, tries to ride across the ford at dawn and finds that the stones are slicker than they look. They leave 3 good men and 1 poor horse behind. The governor does not chase them. He sends back their dead with meat and a promise. "We prefer trade to blood. When you prefer it too, come by daylight." They do, 2 summers later, and the market that day sells wool that is not from any flock south of the river. A clerk writes a new word in his book, slowly, and wonders how it is spelled at the other end of the step. The Oxus does not love anyone, but it respects persistence. By the end of the 3rd season, the lists in Merv are longer, not because there are more fines, but because there are more names. Names are the true walls, an army that can write what it has taken, and from whom and for what can take twice as much without lifting a sword. We began when 3 empires crowded the same room. One was old and Western and had learned to speak the language of law. One was old and Eastern and had learned to speak the language of ceremony. One was new and spoke the language of movement. The 2 old ones believed that the new one was a rumor with a horse. The rumor outlived them both. How? Not by battles alone. Yes, there were days when dunes ran like water before a charge, and nights when ladders kissed walls. Yes, there were fields that swallowed men because a general said the right lie at the right hour. But what lasts is not the dust raised by hooves. It is the lists written after. The garrison that pays its men on the first day of the month. The judge who comes when he says he will. The letter that reaches a village before the rumor does. In Syria, the tax is now due after harvest, not before. In Egypt, a canal cleared once stays cleared because the men who use it now own a share of the shovel. In Iraq, the Douane keeps 3 copies, and the clerk who tries to alter one learns that the captain he thought illiterate can count sheep without fingers. In Fars, a family lights lamps in a room their grandfather reclaimed after the siege. They speak of kings in past tense and speak of peace in present. In Ifriqiya, a coastal trader keeps two sets of scales because he still sells to ships from both sides of the sea, but he knows which inspector will arrive and when. In Khorasan, a boy who learned one law in his father's hall learns another in the market prayer. He grows up not confused, but equipped. There are new dangers. Victory makes accounts fat. Fat accounts draw knives. The capital argues harder now that there is more to argue over. Men who stood shoulder to shoulder at al-Qadisiyyah now stand across a table and whisper different names when the sermon begins. The frontier hears the whispers but does not echo them loudly. It has learned that echoing loses caravans. Rome did not end in a day. It turned like a wheel and rolled its weight into new grooves. Iran did not end in a day. Its language learned to write new names and kept the old words for garden and book. The newcomer learned to be old in the best sense, stubborn about ledgers, generous with wells, careful with the sons of men who used to collect for kings. Maps printed in later centuries draw thick lines where our soldiers saw only choices. A general's secret is simple. There are always three roads: fight, write, and wait. The armies that took cities by storm learned to prefer the other two. The scribes who made peace with ink learned to keep a spear within reach. The governors who waited for winds and harvests learned that patience is not passivity. It is the art of choosing when to spend blood and when to spend silver. Somewhere on the coast, a lighthouse burns above a harbor that has changed flags 3 times in 10 years. It still guides ships in because that is its nature. Somewhere beyond the Oxus, a caravan drinks from a well whose cover bears a seal. No one bothers to read because everyone knows who will repair the cover if it breaks. Somewhere in Iraq, a veteran complains about the price of barley and then smiles because the price is the same as it was last market day. 3 empires met. 2 fell. The third did not replace them with a void. It replaced them with a schedule. Men make schedules when they expect to be here next year. It is the most radical expectation in the world. The dust settles. Not the dust of forgetfulness, but the dust of roads being used. In that dust, on those roads, the story continues, smaller, steadier, and therefore stronger than any shout on a battlefield. The boys born when crowns fell are men now. They argue about taxes and harvests and judges. They ride patrols along rivers that honor no man's name. They come home to towns that were once camps. They kiss their children and tell them a story that begins, not with a king dying, but with a clerk arriving on time. That is how an age turns.